lot of the static site stuff is the foundation of the web. You learn to write good HTML and CSS. And if you have kind of less tooling and less complexity, you learn the basics really well. And knowing HTML and CSS well is something that should be the desired outcome for any web developer.
I agree.
Like, you can't really build good web with like React and Angular or Next or whatever if you don't know the basics.
This is What the Jam, an interview series where we're finding out what's next for Jamstack. Find out more at thefutureofjamstack.org. I'm joined by Juhis today. He's a community builder. He's created the Turku frontend meetup and has been really active in the 11T community. So excited to have him here and talk about Jamstack today. Welcome.
Thanks for inviting me. It's super great to be here. I'm especially a big fan of 11T and this kind of, in general, personal web, small web, anti-corporate web, all of those things. So it's really good to be here and have a discussion about that topic.
Yeah, I'm really keen to dive into that. So let's start off with the big question. What does Jamstack mean to you?
So I think for me, it's this kind of intersection of Jamstack and the personal web. So I'm less interested in the kind of technology as framed by the kind of term of Jamstack and more about what we can do with it. So I've always approached it from the perspective of building your own websites, building websites for small communities with tooling that is excellent and kind of flexible so that you can do almost anything with it with the same tools. And then you get this easy to deploy website that you can just put anywhere. And I think one of the things that I really like is at the end of the day, the output is just a static site. It's just HTML, CSS, maybe some JavaScript. So even if some of the hosting or the platforms go down, it's really easy for me to just take that, move it somewhere else, and then just point the domain to the new place. So this kind of flexibility and simplicity are some things that really resonate with me in the movement.
Yeah, 100%. And why do you think it's important? Like, what have you seen happen where it seems like the indie web and small web is really growing and thriving? Why do you think that's happening?
I think there's a couple of things. I think the first one is that the tooling has improved a lot. Like when I was starting like 20 years ago writing websites, the tooling wasn't there. It was really difficult. Not difficult, but it was, painstaking in a way. And then I think we're coming out from this kind of dark age of social media where for the past decade or so, everything was in social media. And I really enjoy that we're getting back to personal web and to having our own blogs and our own sites. And especially that we're having this kind of long form, long living content. Whereas in social media, it's like really difficult to find anything that was published more than 2 weeks ago. And not even talking about something that happened a decade ago. But if it's in the kind of personal web built with Jamstack tools, we can find it after the next 10 years. And it will still be helpful to ourselves and kind of everybody in the community.
Yeah, no, totally agree. And I feel like everyone gets to show a bit of their personality, like they get complete control over the visuals, what's on there, what they want to write about, the topics, how it's categorized. Like the early kind of social media was a little bit like that with MySpace and Bebo and things, where you could add your own themes and things, and then it kind of got with Facebook, everything's just the same, and you just have Facebook, and it took a lot of the personality out of it, I think.
Yeah, and I think one of the big changes over the last couple of years has been how intensive the algorithm has become.
Yeah.
One thing that I absolutely love is when I write my own blog, I don't need to be clickbaity. I don't need to write kind of controversial stuff just to get people to rile up so that my post would show up. If people follow me with RSS feeds, they will get all my posts. They get to decide who they want to follow and who they want to read. So it gives us as content, I don't want to say content creators, a lot of people hate that word, but us as bloggers and people who write about technology, it gives us this freedom to actually write about things that we're passionate about and write about things that are deep dives. Because we don't have to worry that much about is anybody gonna see this? Because it's not pleasing the algorithm.
Yeah, it's a really good point. It's just so much more authentic. You're not writing for an algorithm. You're writing for you and the community. Which
And
what could be
because
better than
everything's
that?
not exactly, and because everything's not that time sensitive, it's not just a couple of minutes or a couple of hours and then it's gone. You can write things that resonate over time, and you can find people finding blog posts from 10, 15 years ago that are still valid and useful. And that's something that just doesn't happen on social media.
Yeah, so true. I can't think of any time I've seen a LinkedIn post more than like a week old, or Facebook. Maybe Twitter through search, but even that, not very, very uncommon. So before you talked about the evolution of tooling, where did you start out? What tools were you using when you started in web?
So like very beginning, it was just like handcrafted HTML and CSS in the early 2000s. But I was thinking this is kind of, when did I have my first kind of Jamstack style experience? I don't know the exact date, but probably like 2010 or something like that, when I inherited this website that was built in early 2000s and not really updated since. Like the content had been updated, but the infrastructure not. And it was a PHP site, but it acted as a static site. It didn't have a database or anything. And we used to have these plain text files that were generated, like they were the data input, and then we had some scripts written in Perl, and you would run those scripts when you made changes, and it would build the next version of the website. And when I didn't think about it back then, I kind of hated that experience because I wanted to have a database and version control and all the good stuff. But now that I'm thinking about it, there was a lot of the same ideas. That you have the data somewhere and then you build it into a site. And like I mentioned, the tooling has gotten so much better that now it's enjoyable. And I'd rather do it this way than the old way.
Yeah, 100%. I couldn't agree more. Just like, if you don't need all the complexity, why have it there? It's just going to get in your way. It feels so freeing just writing text in a file.
It gives you so much more options. It's like one thing I really enjoy about this kind of Jamstack philosophy is that I can have my kind of engine. I'm using Eleventy most of the time that builds my site and my templating and everything. And then I can have my blog posts written in any platform basically. I started with Markdown with my current blog. Then I moved to Ghost. And then I kind of outgrew Ghost. And now I write my blog posts in Notion. And I'm also kind of growing out of that. And I'm thinking that I would like to build my own kind of simplistic CMS that is purely built for my website.
That's awesome.
But yeah, it's these kind of building blocks that you can choose what you want to use. And if something doesn't work anymore, something goes out of business, or a server crashes, I can always kind of choose a different one. I can always go back to writing Markdown. If I can't log into Notion and I get the best idea, I can still write it in my website as a Markdown file. And I can combine all of these different forces to build one thing that's unified for the end user and the reader of the blog.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that idea should be core to Jamstack or whatever this thing is. Where do you think Jamstack kind of moved beyond that idea? Like, did you see that as an issue, and where did it start heading down that track?
I'm not quite sure, but I think it's a really natural evolution. And I think it was Jared White in one of the earlier episodes where he talked about this kind of de-acronymization of Jamstack. That is not anymore JAM stack, but it's just Jamstack. And it's kind of evolved from the beginnings. God, that's something that always happens with software, right? That like you build something small and simple, but then both software and the world we live in is complex, and we have different needs. So then things start to get more evolved and more kind of bloated. And then somebody comes up with the new one that is, once again, the kind of lightweight version. Then there's been a lot of discussion about this, that like, oh, they're just, people are reinventing HTML websites. But I think the crucial difference is that even though we're going a full circle and coming back to the starting point, at the same time it's been moving forward. So that starting point isn't anymore the same that it used to be, but it's like the same ideas and same concepts. But we take what we learned as an industry has kind of accumulated ideas. The tooling gets better, the way we build things get better, the infrastructure improves. I think that's also a big thing in the kind of earlier discussion, that when I started, we would be like FTPing files to a web host somewhere. And now I just push it to GitHub and it gets automatically deployed. Or I can just drag and drop a folder and it gets deployed. And that is such a big difference. Especially it's kind of democratizing how we build websites. That these days you can have, for example, Eleventy and then one of the cloud providers. And you can get started really fast. There's still a kind of technical barrier of getting started, and I hope that could be the next evolution. That we make website building even easier for those who are not developers. To really creak into that kind of girly web. Everybody can build their own thing. Kind of what you talked about with MySpace and GeoCities and stuff like that.
Yeah, like pairing like a Weebly or a Squarespace, where you can kind of have these building blocks, but built on the fundamentals of the web, so it's portable and can be deployed anywhere, and kind of having the best of both of those worlds. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and gaining the control. That's what I really value as a developer myself, is that I own my website, the code, the content. Yeah. I can choose the distribution. I like this no-code website builders and solutions. I've used them a lot when you just need to get some kind of content out there. But then if you want to move it somewhere else or you want to evolve it, you're stuck with whatever it is, and you can't really export it in a way that would give you good HTML and CSS and build on top of that. So maybe that's the next evolution, that, website builders where you get to download your outcome or put it on your GitHub and then deploy somewhere. I don't know if there's business for that, but in the personal web, I like that idea.
I really like it too. I think I got a lot on that topic. I think one thing that we've seen is a huge injection of VC money into the space. And I think it became apparent pretty quickly that it's hard to monetize static sites, because you can have even a very large static site that is just using bandwidth and You don't need a lot of servers because it's static, and it's a good solution. So then you get more and more into compute and charging for compute because that's how you really monetize. And it's for me, it's like it's really sad that, well, I think it's powerful having those tools available. I think they're great tools, but I think it's sad that we've forgotten about like the simplicity and just using the right tool for the job. And because there's not a lot of money in static websites, there's not a lot of voices. Like all of the marketing you see in web development is like JavaScript, serverless, using more compute. How do you think we? And just one more thing on that. Before you were talking about the cycle and how we're actually moving forward, I completely agree. I think it's I feel like static websites are like looked down upon because it's not like bleeding edge JavaScript can like build the next enterprise huge application. And it's easy to look at it as stagnant, static, but it's really not. There's so much innovation happening in the static space, and it's moving, and there's a really awesome community about it. Um, yeah, how do you think we, or do we need to have like a bigger voice in the web development space, or is it fine just being more of a niche community?
Well, in general, I'm always up for niche communities. I think not every community needs to be big, but I do think that one of the important things that we can have a voice on and what we can encourage people with is that a lot of the static side stuff is the foundation of the web. You know,
Yeah.
you learn to write good HTML and CSS. And if you have kind of less tooling and less complexity, you learn the basics really well. And knowing HTML and CSS well is something that should be the desired outcome for any web developer.
I agree.
Like you can't really build good web with like React and Angular or Next or whatever if you don't know the basics. And one field where this is really important is accessibility.
Mm.
I think I had to learn it the hard way. Kind of, when I studied back in the day or when I was a self-learner, nobody talked about accessibility in my bubble where I learned. And then when I started getting jobs in the industry, suddenly I was in a situation that I just didn't know about like the semantic web and how to build good things. I just knew that you can do stuff with JavaScript, basically. So I had to kind of relearn all of that.
Mm.
But I think that if people would do more static sites and they would maybe start with that, they could gain this kind of stronger understanding of the basics. And also, I can't remember who said it, but they said it really well that you should always choose the technology which is the least powerful. So like always use the one that achieves the same goal with as little power as possible.
Yeah.
So basically, if you can do it with HTML, do it with HTML. If you can do it with HTML and CSS, do it with those. And then only add JavaScript when you really need it. Rather than building everything with JavaScript and then trying to make everything work. Because you're not leaning that much against the basics of the semantic web.
Yeah, 100%. I always come back to an analogy of vehicles on that one. It's like if you're going to visit your neighbor who lives 100 meters down the road, and you've got a choice of walking, a bike, a car, or like a semi truck, it's pretty clear which, maybe not exactly which one, but which kind of circle you'll draw around which transport you'll choose. And then if you're going to a supermarket a kilometer away, that will be a different circle. If you need to haul all the furniture in your house, that will be a different circle. And it's pretty obvious which vehicle to use for which each job. And it should be the same with web technology, you would think.
Yeah. But it's a challenging thing to balance. Because if you're somebody new to the industry, there's so many things you can learn and so many opinions on what to learn. And maybe picking up that React as the first thing is the most lucrative right now.
Exactly.
Because that's something that's more likely to get you a job. Especially because, like, for some reason we don't appreciate HTML and CSS as a skill enough. Like, maybe we think that it's kind of assumed or implied that if you're a web developer, you know the basics. But it's far from it.
Agreed. Yeah, it's again, it's like kind of looked down upon, like CSS check. But you can have very basic CSS where you understand some fundamentals and can put blocks on a screen. And the top end of CSS is incredible what people can do without JavaScript or anything else with modern CSS. So, like next, yeah, you touched on an interesting point there. What do you? Who do you think the Jamstack community should be for? Like, should it be? There's like a couple of paths that I think Jamstack was trying to solve. One, I think it's a fantastic entry point, to your point, to someone learning web development. Just get the fundamentals right, learn how the browser works, learn what it's capable of. And then if you want to go down another route later, you'll understand those fundamentals and you'll have a lot more context in whatever framework you're using. Two, like more of a, like, I guess, expert enthusiast web developer community who's like passionate about pushing the browser and web development to the edge and kind of being at the forefront of that. And then three, one of the reasons Jamstack was coined in the first place was, particularly for someone non-technical, static sounds bad. It sounds like, my page is going to have nothing moving on it. If you describe something as static, it doesn't sound positive. So Jamstack kind of put some hype and a new spin on it and new text, so it gets like more buy-in from technical people. Which of those do you think is most important? Like, if you had to rank them 1 to 3.
That's a really difficult one. Yeah. I think all of them are kind of, if not equally interesting and valid, at least very close. I think the kind of naming of Jamstack I think it's a fun name. I think there's a lot of great puns that you can make. You can make a lot of great stickers for laptops with all sort of jam stuff. So I'm really excited about that. And like you said, I totally agree that static sounds boring when you don't know what it means. I'm a big fan of static sites as a name or term. But I'm coming from the inside and I know what it compares to, and I'm excited about that. But one thing, I think the first two groups, the beginners and then the enthusiasts and the professionals, I think together make a really good pair. Because like I said, it's a really good entry point. You can build on top of the things that you learn, little by little. But then the people who are really excited about it, they're really taking things forward. They're making things evolve by being able to innovate in I'm gonna call it a simple space, even though I don't think there's anything simple in software. And I think that that kind of ecosystem is really sparking innovation and it's sparking creativity.
Mhm.
And I think it's more difficult to do in a lot of other sections of software development. And it's partly because we are living in this kind of personal web, which is all about creativity to a lot of us. And when I was growing up, I never felt as a creative. I didn't know how to draw, how to paint, how to sing, how to write stories. But then I realized at some point during my late teens, early kind of adulthood, or in my 20s, that you can be creative with code and you can be creative with technology. And that was really freeing to me because then I realized that I can actually, I liked being creative. I just didn't know how to. And then when people build these small things, once again, the beginners, it's much easier to learn from something that's 50 lines of code and it does one thing well than trying to understand from how does React hooks work? How do you kind of dissect that as something that you can just take a look at and learn how it's built and so on. So I think they feed each other really well, and I think and I hope that the professional side of it, the more experienced people, they take the entire industry forward by building things.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that's one thing I love about this community is it's like, look at this cool thing I've built. Here's here's how I did it, and here's a library if you want to do it on your website too. There's just so much sharing of knowledge, and it's like very positive community.
Exactly.
It's yeah.
And I gave a talk in February in the 11th meetup where I talked about how excited I am that you can have these building blocks that you can use in different ways. That the site that we have for Turkula frontend, for example, it uses these global data files, which are JSON files, and then it uses those to build the website dynamically. But you could also do the same output by having some kind of a CMS server that you make API calls to, or you could write it in HTML. And there's so many ways that you can achieve the same goal that then you can kind of mix and match. And if you never learn about that one thing, you can still achieve it without using that one tool. And then hopefully at some point we'll have even more interoperability between different static site generators. Because right now it's kind of you pick one and then you get that ecosystem and that community. And I don't know how those things would be integrated, but with some kind of Unix philosophy that you can pipe things from, let's say, Eleventy to an agnostic tool, back to Eleventy or outputting something. And I think that would be really cool.
Yeah. We're yeah, that's something we're thinking about a lot, like a tool. I think just the whole migration to a static site generator as well. Like if you have a WordPress site at the moment and you want to switch to Hugo or 11.2 or Jekyll or something, it might be, if you're a company, it might be a tens of thousands dollar project and months of engineering time. Where there is a common format between those two of HTML. So if you can take the output of your WordPress site and reverse engineer it into 11T, now you can make that switch instantly and at least get the site into a static kind of state. And then from there you can slowly iterate and bring in new plugins and ideas and just keep building on it. It's hard to do that in a WordPress ecosystem. It's all plugins and complexity kind of topped on each other. That at some point it becomes very rigid. You've built this machine that has a lot of moving parts and it has to all work step at the same time to work together.
That's something that, just as a complete side note, that's something I love about static site generators compared to WordPress, is that I don't have to worry about the plugins. I still use a lot of plugins, but I don't need to worry if they're updated all the time and they're kind of changing and switching. I can still use the old ones because the output is always static.
That's it. And same with the static site generator itself. Like you could use the initial release of 11t to build your site. And if that builds the output you want and has the tools that you want, then there's no reason to upgrade. It does the job you want it to do. And I feel like that is a really nice perk. So I want to end with one question. You've kind of talked about this a little bit, but let's talk about names for this community. We had a panel yesterday where we were circling on some ideas, and I want to put them to you and see what you think. So option 1, stick with Jamstack. It's well known and people generally know what it means, but it has a lot of baggage and the definition has changed a lot over the years. Option 2, pre-baked. It's like a reference to Aaron Swartz's Bake Don't Fry, and it kind of cements the term in static websites. And option 3 is static first. So it's more of a philosophy about default to static and start with static. And if you need to go on beyond that, just understand the trade-offs that you're making. Yeah, what do you think about those 3? What are you drawn to?
I like the philosophy of static first. I think that there's a lot that the commercial web could also learn from that. And I want to insert an anecdote now that we ended up talking about that, where I think that there's a lot of cases where, in addition to having your kind of dynamic site, it would be good to often have a static site as well. For example, if you have a conference and then there's like thousands of people on a bad hotel Wi-Fi, it would be really nice to have a really quick, easy to cache schedule page or like info page about that conference when everybody's on a bad Wi-Fi, or when there's times of like crises or things like that, so that people who are on bad internet can get the info and not get timed out. So I hope that thinking of from the static first would kind of leak into the commercial web as well. But I think it has the same kind of problem that we discussed earlier, that static is not the most exciting word.
Yeah.
And I think that when we've had I also think that it has the biggest kind of tendency that it could outdate itself faster than the others. Like, nobody talks about mobile first anymore.
True.
Because it's become kind of, if not default, at least a really popular thing. But then the other two, I like both of them. I've never been really kind of a stickler for brand names or brand identities, because I think that the people matter more and the ideas matter more. So like saying that something is like, this is not Jamstack because it doesn't fit this strict kind of box that we drew on it. Like, that's not something that I enjoy personally, and I think that's something that indie web with the capital I, capital W is kind of having. As that like, I like the indie web with the small, like the small case I and W, where it's just like people building independent stuff. But then with the indie web, capital I, capital W, there's a lot of kind of self-imposed, not totally serious in a way, restrictions that you should have this and you should have that, and then you have this level of kind of compliance in a way with the system. But I personally like Jamstack. I think it's fun, it's whimsical, and since it's been kind of expanding from the kind of JAM more to kind of the personal space, the personal web and small web in general, and static site generators. I think I would like to keep that and bring more people into it and kind of focus more on the people. But if the community wants to change, I'm all for that as well. I think it's important that the community feels that it's good and welcoming. As long as it's also kind of open and welcoming to people who might not be 100% within the original definitions, but still share the same ideas.
Yeah, that's a really good
non-answer of not taking a really big stance. But if I would have to vote, I would vote for Jamstack.
Yeah. No, it was a really good answer. I think you really got into the nuances of each, and yeah, I swing between all three of those in every conversation. It's there's no clear choice. Yeah, but that's what all these conversations are about, is trying to get that, see what the community wants and feels about it.
Yeah. And I think we can also have like multiple identities as a brand. Since it's not a brand owned by somebody, kind of individual, I think we could have some kind of fun stickers with the other names as well, and then kind of sub-communities in a way that we could, not everything needs to be, like, let's say somebody wants to organize a conference. I think there's a lot of good opportunities to name it in different kind of ways, while still staying in the Jamstack kind of ecosystem.
Yeah, agreed. Like one of the names that came up yesterday was the Static Site Fan Club. And I think no matter what, I'm going to get swag with Static Site Fan Club on it. I think that's awesome. Juhis, thank you so much for joining today. This is an awesome conversation.
Thank you for inviting me. Always a pleasure to talk about small web and static site generators. This was a lot of fun.
That's it for today's interview. Find out more at thefutureofjamstack.org.